All new Pacific Mornings with Will on 531 PI.
It is 7:31. This is Pacific Mornings on 5:31 PI. I'm William Terite. Great to have your company this Tuesday. Now, Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters, of course, is in Washington ahead of his big meeting with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio tomorrow morning. Now, on President Trump's policy moves, Peters remains pragmatic, focusing on how they impact New Zealand and the Pacific rather than passing judgment, at least to the media, that is. Meanwhile, Rubio has been quite busy on the global stage, recently helping to broker a deal ceasefire rather, between Ukraine and Russia. So, begs the question, what kind of meeting can we expect between Peters and Rubio? International relations expert Professor Robert Patman joins us now to discuss that and much more. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, William.
Look, we just had Marco Rubio's former chief of staff on this morning chatting about this meeting. He reckons that this is going to be a fruitful meeting and that Rubio will insist that the United States cares about the Pacific region. Hard to see that, though, when foreign aid has been slashed, etc. What are you making, or what are you predicting ahead of this meeting, though?
Well, it seems, as your introductory comment suggested, that Mr. Peters is being very cautious and pragmatic and not too judgmental in advance. I think, but reading between the lines, the New Zealand government is very concerned about the direction of the new Trump administration. As a country, we depend on what's called the international rules-based order, which is international relations based on due process and principles and rules. The majority of countries depend on that. But Mr. Trump seems to be preferring the projection of power to rules and the rule of law internationally. So that's a worry for us. Mr. Trump has made territorial claims against Canada, a very close friend of our country, against Denmark with respect to Greenland, and of course has made a proposal to annex Gaza. Again, that doesn't sit well with New Zealand foreign policy, and also reclaiming the Panama Canal. So the directions in which the Trump administration has gone, and then of course there's the knotty issue of Ukraine, as Chris Luxon has just made clear from India. Mr. Putin can end that conflict within 12 or 24 hours by simply withdrawing his illegal presence in Ukraine back to removing his army back to the internationally recognized border of Russia. So there's a number of areas where we disagree quite strongly with the Trump administration. And then, of course, there's the Pacific. Compared with the Biden administration, the Trump administration seems semi-detached, at least from a New Zealand perspective, about its commitment to the Pacific Island nations region. So that's a big worry.
Yes, for sure. And look, let's dig in a wee bit deeper from a Pacific perspective. You rightfully pointed out the Biden administration, pumped investment, or pledged investments, perhaps the more appropriate word here, over $1 billion in new aid for Pacific Island Forum countries during his presidency. Now, we've heard from Baron Wanga, of course, of the Pacific Islands Forum now that the US is reviewing it, and they're ultimately trying to get a meeting together to try and thrash out the details there. Do you think that this, under the Trump administration, that kind of funding is gone, Burger?
It would appear so. US aid is in the process of being disestablished. About 83% of the programs which existed under the Biden administration are being terminated. What remains is unclear. So the United States is very much in a state of flux. And my concern is that Mr. Peters, the foreign minister, in his free spell, he's been foreign minister 3 times. But in each time, he worked very hard to try to get the United States more engaged in the Pacific Island nations. And I'm not sure, there's no indication so far that the Trump administration is going to follow in the footsteps of the Biden administration. If anything, they seem to be pursuing an anything but Biden foreign policy. So it's unclear. And of course, the concern here is this has big implications for New Zealand. About 60% of New Zealand's foreign assistance goes to Pacific Island nations. And it also has big implications for Australia. Australia and New Zealand may well have to step up their engagement and assistance if there is something of a vacuum left by US semi-detachment towards the Pacific. There's also the question of China. Many Pacific Island nations, as we've seen recently from a New Zealand perspective, the controversy over the Cook Islands, there is many Pacific Island nations. If there is not this prospect of US assistance, and there's no more prospect of greater assistance from New Zealand and Australia, may well see China as a viable option.
Yes. Look, just before we perhaps move on from the Pacific, just keen to get your thoughts. Again, the former chief of staff for Marco Rubio on this morning insisted that, the United States remains perhaps laser focused on ensuring that China doesn't get a foothold here in the Pacific. But having said that, like I pointed out, US foreign aid has been axed and China is continuing to make inroads here. We look at the Cook Islands deal that was inked just a few weeks ago. Do you think that there is a void that is perhaps going to be left for China to swoop in here?
I think it's highly likely. I do not think the administration has the Trump administration has a coherent approach to China. They keep identifying China as the major strategic competitor. They say that one of the reasons they have taken in their words, a more constructive approach to Russia is because they're hoping to weaken the partnership between Russia and China. But Mr. Trump's approach to the Ukraine conflict, which means making where Zelensky has to make all the concessions, the country that's been invaded, and the aggressor, the Putin regime, gets all the rewards for the invasion. Well, that's sending the exactly wrong message to China. In other words, Mr. Trump says he wants to be more competitive in relation to China, but he's actually bolstering China, both with his ambiguity about aid commitments in the region, the Pacific Island nations region, but also by pressing for a Ukraine settlement on Putin's terms. That will embolden China. China is the major ally of the Putin invasion of Ukraine, and it's sending exactly the wrong message that aggression pays. Well, that could make China far more assertive in relation to Taiwan. It could make China far more assertive in relation to the Pacific Island nations. So it's difficult at the moment to see how credible the Trump administration's approach to China is.
Look, this isn't a facetious question, but I'm keen to get your thoughts. Is Trump a transactional president or is he trying to be a peacekeeping president?
Well, he's very selective about his peacekeeping approach. He said that he wanted to annex Gaza, and he's actually ratcheted up tensions in the region as a result. That's completely unacceptable to Gaza's Arab neighbors. And he's also made, as we said before, the Trump administration has made a whole series of imperial territorial claims, some of which are against liberal democracies. So I don't think he can wear the peace label. Is it transactional? That remains to be seen. This is a nice way of describing, a sort of polite way of describing an approach in which principles are put to one side and which rules are put to one side, and America first is applied as interpreted by the Trump administration. It has to be more transactional than peace orientated. I certainly agree with that. But again, it's puzzling. Why is Mr. Trump incapable? Let's be quite clear. Mr. Trump is the leader of the most powerful country in the world. And yet he's siding with a country which has invaded a neighbor, Ukraine. And yet, Russia only has an economy a 14th of the size of the American economy. So it's puzzling. It doesn't look particularly transactional, and in that sense. So it's certainly what we do know is that Mr. Trump has no time for traditional alliances. He's made it quite clear that Europe cannot depend on the United States. And so he's certainly presiding over some dramatic shifts in international relations.
Certainly. Thank you very much for your time. That is Professor Robert Patman. The text machine is lighting up, agreeing with you this morning. Thank you very much for that. You can catch that full interview on our Facebook page, 531PI, and it'll be on our website, www.pmn.co.nz, along with an article.